Debate, which is being introduced by Lee Anderson. I call Lee Anderson to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chope. It is indeed a pleasure to serve under your chair today. Now, sepsis is one of the least well-known medical conditions and the #1 cause of preventable death in the world. 11 million people die each year in the world from sepsis, and that represents 1 in 5 of all deaths in the world. Now, sepsis can be very difficult to detect and hard to distinguish from other illnesses. Sepsis claims more lives than lung cancer, bowel cancer, breast cancer and prostate cancer put together. It's truly astonishing. Across the UK alone, 48,500 people die a year from sepsis. The Academy of Medical Royal Colleges suggests that figure is much higher, at about 68,000 a year. That's incredible. Now, given that there are approximately 200,000 cases of sepsis each year in the UK, it costs the NHS between 1.5 and £2 billion every single year. And the wider economy, at least 11 billion, some people think it's closer to 15 billion pounds a year. And the direct cost of sepsis to the NHS is 1% of the budget. Now, one of the reasons I've requested this debate today is because I've got many constituents who have been unfortunate enough to suffer from sepsis. And I have a very brave young lady in the hall today, who is Abby. She's sat at the back. And I'm incredibly proud of the strength and determination she's shown to overcome this illness. She's a survivor. But I'm going to tell Abby's story because in November the 28th, 2022, she'd been to a doctor's for some antibiotics for tonsils because she's a long sufferer of tonsillitis. She thought it was tonsillitis again. She's suffered with that all her life. That's understandable. At 6 p.m. on that day, she was blue lighted to King's Mill Hospital in Ashfield to the accident and emergency because she was fighting for her breath and literally dying in front of her husband, Steve, who sat there. When she got to the hospital, she was given numerous injections of adrenaline. Whilst travelling to the hospital, they thought she was having an anaphylactic fit, which was a reaction to the antibiotics that she'd had that morning. When she arrived at the A&E, she was put on 10 litres of oxygen, but it was evident that this was not enough. It wasn't doing the job. But they didn't, unfortunately, administer any antibiotics or put her on IVs at that time. No blood tests were taken, and her husband, Steve, was constantly asking the staff, is there something else we can do for Abby? Only now, looking back a few years later, was it clear that sepsis was never thought of at the time. Abby very quickly deteriorated, so she was transferred to the ICU at Kingsman Hospital, where she was placed into an induced coma. She was fighting for her life, and all her organs began to shut down at a very rapid rate. Only when the ICU did some tests when the tests started to take place did staff realise how ill she was and that she'd actually got pneumonia, strep B and sepsis. However, this was just the start of her journey. When the ICU team realised that it was far more complicated than they could deal with at King's Mill, so they contacted Glenfield General Hospital in Leicester, and she was transferred to be placed on an ECMO. That's a machine that takes the place of the heart and the lungs. I suppose it's a life support machine. She was very lucky to have fitted the criteria to go on that machine, and she stayed there on that machine for the next 3 weeks fighting to stay alive in a coma. And without that machine, she would not be here today. There are only 5 of these machines in the UK, and it costs, I think it costs the NHS £20,000 per day per patient. During the process of being on the ECMO machine, it was visible to Abby's family that she was going to lose both hands and both legs beneath the knee, because sepsis had taken over her body, giving her gangrene. On December the 17th, she was transferred back to Kingsmill Hospital, ICU, because she was no longer had to be on the ECMO machine at Leicester, but she still needed round-the-clock intensive care treatment. On February the 9th, she was transferred to Nottingham City Hospital to the burns and plastic ward, where she would wait for her amputations. Imagine that, having to wait in hospital knowing they're going to take your arms and your legs away after everything she's been through. On May the 4th, she was discharged, having spent 6 months in hospital and coming out as a quadruple amputee. And unfortunately, she told me just before we came in, she sometimes forget that she also lost the sight in her left eye. It's incredibly sad. Incredible brave lady. That's Abby's story. And I want to thank you for sharing that with me. And, yeah, I've got other constituents contacted me about sepsis. There's Karen from Ashfield, her elderly mother contracted sepsis, had a very awful time at the hospital. The diagnosis was slow, wasn't picked up properly, and just a few months later, sadly, her mum collapsed and passed away. Now, Neil from Ashfield, he was much luckier. It was picked up very, very quickly. They got the antibiotics into his body. He made a full recovery. Pam from Ashfield, it was very lucky for her husband that she was a former nurse. She recognised the symptoms and insisted that the hospital put the IV and the antibiotics into his body very, very quickly. Because I think you've got a window of about 12 hours to get these antibiotics in. And the point of this debate is today is getting that awareness out there, not just in the wider community, but actually with the hospitals as well, because it's very unfortunate that this is being missed. And, you know, I don't know, in Abby's case, maybe if they'd have picked it up quicker, then we would not be sat here today. But, you know, Shirley from Ashfield, she had a better experience. The hospital picked it up very, very quickly, and she made a full recovery. So there are people making full recoveries from it. And we all know about the sad story of our colleague, Craig McKinley, Lord McKinley now. And I've been having conversations with Craig over the past few weeks about this debate. He can't be here today. But he had a torrid time. His wife was told he was going to die, but he fought back. I think she put pictures of his family on the roof of his room at the hospital, and he's a fighter, is Craig. And it nearly took his life, but it took him several months to get over it. We didn't know where he was. We thought he was just on holiday somewhere at first, but we didn't see him for months. And then, you know, we heard what condition he was in. But he came back to Parliament a few months back, and I've got to be honest, there wasn't a dry eye in the house when he walked in. The bionic man, he walked in, and it's so emotional. But he's living proof that you can fight back from this disease, and you can, you know, have a reasonable quality of life given the right support and a good hospital. As I said before, it's like 48,500 people a year die from sepsis. Other organisations put it much higher. You know, when you think about it, it's 1,000 people a year dying from sepsis in this country. Yet if you stop somebody in the street and ask them what sepsis was, they'd probably struggle to tell you. But the symptoms: very high or low temperatures, uncontrolled shivering, confusion, passing urine less than normal, blotchy or cold arms and legs. Now, I know this because a few years back, my wife had these symptoms, and my wife's she's got cystic fibrosis, and she's post-double lung transplant, so she's got all sorts of medical problems as well. And we thought it was maybe rejection of her lungs or pneumonia or something like that, and managed to get her to the hospital, and it was sepsis. And they told us at the hospital that if you'd have left it any longer, she would have died. Simple as that, she would have died. Because she's got the other complications, she's got no immune system, etc. So last year, I think it was, when she had it again, we knew straight away what it was. You know, the same symptoms, so, you know, we've got her there pretty sharpish. So I also learnt today from Abby as well, on her road to recovery, she's got prosthetic limbs, and I don't know if the minister's aware that she's on a list at Leeds Hospital to have a hand transplant. So she's got a prosthetic limbs. I know she's got a hand for a right arm, but she's on the list for a hand transplant, which I think is absolutely amazing that we're doing that in this country now. And it offers people a lot of hope. And she doesn't stop smiling, does Abby. But I guess what I'm asking for, Mr. Chope and colleagues and Minister, is we have a campaign in this country for strokes. We all know the symptoms now of strokes. You know, we've all seen the stroke campaign on TV about the face. You know, can you talk? About can you lift your arm? Can you keep your arms up? We know all this now. I guess what I'd like to see is a campaign for sepsis. So families and, more importantly, our hospitals are fully aware. And what does it cost to put some antibiotics in somebody just as a precaution? If they get any shaking, they're cold, they're blotchy, they've got fevers, you know, for goodness sake, what does it cost to put, you know, an IV on them and get some antibiotics pumped into them while they can do all the checks?
Will the honourable member...
I will give way, I'll certainly give way.
And I would like to congratulate him on bringing this important debate. And I would just like to put to him, does he agree that sharing stories, not you know, all of us sharing stories of those that we know affected by sepsis, as he has done so sensitively today about his Abbey, yeah. Does he agree that that helps to highlight the importance of early recognition of this dreadful disease and the importance of early diagnosis?
Yes. I thank the honourable member for intervention. Yeah, she's absolutely right, if I'm honest, and this is what this debate is about today. It's about sharing stories. Like I said earlier, you could probably ask 100 people on the street what sepsis was, and the vast majority would struggle to tell you what it was and what the symptoms were. So what we need, and it's quite right, is a campaign awareness, whether that's in schools, whether that's through social media, whether that's through the TV or whatever. I would really like to see a campaign on sepsis so everybody knows the symptoms. So I'm going to wrap up now. I've spoken for 13 minutes, and I know there's lots of colleagues here that want to speak as well, and I am conscious we've only got an hour, so thank you for your time. Thank you, Mr. Chope.